Chapter 595. The history of war was almost equivalent to the history of human development. Everything was destroyed in war, and civilization was created from the ruins. This cycle was the trajectory of human history for thousands of years. There was no mediation, no compromise, only an all-out effort to destroy the other side. In the process, people from different countries and religions united as one. To some extent, this kind of war could be said to be beyond common sense. At midnight, at the edge of the Harvey Desert, the fully equipped army stretched for miles in the dark. The soldiers in iron armor were silent. There was only the sound of breathing and the sound of the night wind blowing the flag in the air. So far, the main force of the rescue operation had reached 250,000 people. After the pagan army of Achates, who was originally escorting Kad home, returned to the front line after receiving the news from Luoya, there were three powerhouses in the front line: Cynthia, Rodney, and Wood. In this rescue operation, the main force needed to have enough power to break through the blockade of the aliens. Therefore, the soldiers' combat power and willpower were very high. The pagan army of Achates and Luoya, who was the son of God, perfectly met these two requirements. At this time, in front of Nuo-Arya and the others, in the dark night, as many as 200,000 aliens were in formation in the desert. The dull sound of the horn continued to be heard in the distance, and the light of the torches converged into an ocean. Remember, now that the king of the aliens was in the desert, all the aliens had entered a state of excitement. They were not afraid of death, and they were even eager to kill in front of the king of their race to show their bravery. Regardless of whether it was the tall giant at the front or the advisors in the tents at the back, none of them were intimidated by the aura of the aliens. To the warriors who had walked out of blood and fire last year, such a threat was nothing but a useless roar. Their will would not be shaken by it. For the continuation of their race, for the elderly parents behind them, and for the young children behind them, they must fight and win. It's about time, right? She looked at the clock beside her and reminded the blonde angel. The blonde angel nodded slightly and gave an affirmative answer with a slightly nervous expression. After a moment of silence, Nuo-Arya stepped forward and walked towards the empty stone plaza. The square wasn't large, but it was obvious from the bricks that it had been built a long time ago. As a matter of fact, it was indeed an ancient artifact from the Second Era. Amidst the silence, Nuo-Arya stepped into the square. The moment she entered, the angel statues in the four cardinal directions flashed simultaneously, and a holy aura suddenly spread out. Around the square, countless clerics raised their holy staffs, and converged the power of spells on the four statues. Specks of light began to appear out of nowhere in the originally dense dark clouds, spreading across the sky like fireflies. Under the night sky, in the middle of the square, the blonde girl held a stone sword in her hand, and the blood in her body suddenly burst out. Under the resonance of the ancient angel king's blood, the eyes of the four war angel statues lit up at the same time, and then four beams of golden light shot up into the sky. In the silent dark sky, a violent roar accompanied by a spell reaction that shook the sky suddenly appeared, and the golden light quickly dyed the sky like a dye. Under the changing sky, the shadow of the angel king appeared behind Nuo-Arya. She pulled out a stone sword and gently slit her wrist. That was the blood of angels, and also the blood of kings. After thousands of years, the ancient magic circle was completely activated by Nuo-Arya's angel king's blood. In the violent tremor, the souls of the war angels in the four cardinal directions emerged from the statues and bowed to the blonde girl. At the same time, the four beams of light that shot up into the sky merged into one and turned into a thunderbolt that shook the sky. That was a flashing light, and also a sacred sword that was burning with golden flames. It floated in the air, and when it hung over everyone's heads, even the most fearless of the mutants would feel an instinctive fear. After many failed attempts, the helpless mutants had no choice but to advance their attack. In the low sound of the horn, tens of thousands of mutants left their bunkers and charged towards the human army. At the same time, in the square far away, the blonde girl opened her eyes and solemnly chanted the name of the spell. In the next moment, the golden swords fell like rain, slaughtering the common people in the flames. The human army cheered in the rain of light, and the mutants' bodies were penetrated by the flames, and the entire army quickly began to collapse. From the army in the northern plains to the small teams in the southern mountains, from the majestic fortress to the front line that was just a few miles away from the enemy camp, the commanders of various countries and regions finally received the same order after a long and tense wait. She had pure white skin, a small nose, cherry-colored lips, and a pair of scarlet eyes that were filled with mystery. Her long eyelashes paired with her beautifully shaped eyebrows made the girl's temperament seem even more mysterious and playful, making her even more unpredictable. "You scared me. Is it Altacia?" Perhaps because the young man woke up too suddenly, only when Luoya spoke did the white-haired demoness who widened her eyes suddenly react. She was stunned for a moment before blinking her eyes, and then straightened her body with a stiff expression. Yes, after all, the Gulan Dea is a person of few words and is more direct. As the ancient god who visited Luoya the most in the dream, the demoness was very familiar with this kind of thing. And as the Punisher under Shi-Ya, the demoness knew a lot about the young man's bloodline, so it wasn't strange for her to know his whereabouts in the dream. However, the young man was a little concerned about one thing. Lord Hero, what do you mean? Heartbeat. Lord Hero's heart is only left with a quarter. This is something I didn't expect, so I checked it a little. Under Altacia's explanation, the black-haired young man's face showed an expression of understanding. After feeling his heart that had recovered, Luoya couldn't help but thank the demoness. Altacia's face also showed a smile, and her heart slowly relaxed. Work. By the way, Altacia, the guards of Tark Fortress, those people have already been sent back. About an hour, but the time flow here is a little strange, so it would take about a day over there. Hearing Altacia's words, Luoya couldn't help but put on a serious face. Although a day's time wasn't long, but under the situation of losing contact with the outside world, it could change a lot of things, such as Nuo-Arya's support. The previous operation to encircle and annihilate Luoya had a large number of troops, so it was impossible for humans to not notice. If Luoya wasn't abandoned, the humans should have already broken out in the Harvey Desert. If they want to cooperate, this is undoubtedly the best opportunity. Thinking like this, the young man's eyes became firm, and asked Altacia about the situation of the guards. Hearing this, the demoness thought for a moment and said, Healing spell? Hearing Altacia's answer, Luoya couldn't help but let out a big sigh of relief. He didn't dare to guarantee other things, but speaking of the people who knew healing spell, as the eastern front line of the church, almost half of the people in Tark Fortress knew healing spell. And, even if these humans didn't recover their battle strength, it doesn't matter. I also found some other things, just treat it as a gift this time. Then, I will go back first. It's time to leave this space. After a long time, the black-haired young man sighed. He stretched out his palm, felt the connection with Wilhelmina, and softly said the name of the skill. While speaking, a silver-white mist erupted from Luoya's palm and covered his whole body, and the young man's figure disappeared. After Luoya left, the mist floating in the air suddenly began to condense and turned into a vague human figure. It silently looked at the place where the young man was before, and silently dispersed with the wind. Overall, Luoya's journey back was quite smooth, and the coordinates determined by Wilhelmina's location were also very accurate. Mina, you're finally back, that's great. Hearing the young girl's words, Luoya couldn't help but fall into silence. He stretched out his hand and stroked the young girl's hair, and for a moment, his heart softened. Mina, how long have I been away? After a moment of silence, the grey-blue-haired young girl said so. Hearing this, Luoya nodded and compared the time mentioned by Wilhelmina with Altacia's before confirming some information. Who are those two soldiers? After saying so, Wilhelmina looked worriedly at the soldiers who fell to the ground behind her. Luoya nodded and went forward to check. He discovered that the two soldiers seemed to have been hit by an excessive amount of curse power, which caused them to faint. It should be the after-effect of the mist of concealment's actions. Unlike the empty corridor before, at this moment, the inside of Tucker Fortress was full of people. They were either clerics, logisticians, or soldiers on guard. Luoya and Wilhelmina looked at each other and quickly moved. They passed through the corridor and headed to the command room on the top floor. On the other hand, The person that Luo was about to meet was also one of his goals this time. He was an old acquaintance of his father, Ka Dia, and also an elder that he had always respected. After entering the room, the young man saw several staff members lying on the ground, and at the end of the table, there was a golden-haired man. Quickly approaching the golden-haired man, Luo checked and heaved a sigh of relief. Then, he placed the golden-haired man on the seat and cast a healing spell. Perhaps Kai Yin's foundation was good, or perhaps Luo's healing spell had improved. After 2 minutes of healing, the golden-haired man finally woke up. Opening his eyes slightly, the golden-haired man stared at the young man for a long time and asked with an uncertain tone as if he didn't understand why the young man in front of him was a size bigger. Hearing his words, Luo nodded and gave a serious answer. Yes, I'm still okay. Wait. I remember now. We were attacked by that white mist. 2 years ago. That's right, Your Highness, a lot of things happened in the 2 years that you were missing. Please listen to me. In Luo's previous life, there was a saying to describe war. Victory and defeat were common in war. Unlike the irascible mutants with low IQ, humans had the ability to plan, and they also had the technology and action to implement the formulated plans. Therefore, they could maximize their advantages. For a long time, humans were able to fight back and forth with the mutants. This was a large part of the reason why humans could fight back and forth with the mutants. At the moment when the Harvey Desert battle began, the entire eastern front line of up to 3 million human coalition forces launched a full-scale assault at the same time. Through the connection of thousands of curse vessels, the combat forces from all over the world acted in unison. On the plains, the Steel Army went straight to the enemy camp amidst the thunderous sound of hooves. Between the mountains and forests, silent assassination squads harvested lives in silence. With the unimaginable organizational power of humans facing a common enemy, this unprecedented large-scale feint attack had a good effect. Almost all the mutant tribes fell into a quagmire. On the main battlefield, the battle situation had begun to lean toward the human side as expected. The King of Angels, this was the king of the race, and also the existence above the 7 archangels. Under the king's command, the enemy could only die. And the reflection of reality was the holy sword hanging above the mutants' heads. Tens of thousands of warriors were decapitated as they ran. Their blood dyed the desert red, and the burning holy fire ignited their bodies. No matter how thick the shield was, it was as if it was nothing in front of the holy sword. All the counterspells were corroded by the golden sky and disintegrated under the power of the Angel King. Countless golden swords stood in the sea of blood and mountains of corpses. The blazing flames burned the corpses. Under such heavenly power, the mutant army had fled in all directions. The priests who used the Legion curse were almost wiped out. Under the signal of Xia Luote, the Rose military began to move. Various flashing curse vessels were launched, and thousands of long-range weapons were activated. Under the command of Disregarding the Cost, the Sorophia family began the most extravagant and violent long-range attack of humans. Boom dash! In the flashing light, the reddish-brown-haired girl waved her hand again, and the sound of a horn sounded in the desert. But unlike before, this time, it was from the human side. Amidst the impassioned sound of the bugle horn, a gigantic giant suddenly appeared, brandishing his fists as he led the charge. Behind him was Valkyrie Brittany, clad in iron armor, who soared into the sky. Under such tactics, the mutants had no chance to breathe. The vanguard of the human army was unstoppable. From the rain of holy swords to the carpet bombing, less than 1 in 10 enemies survived 2 waves of attacks. Those who survived basically lost their combat power. In fact, compared to killing the enemy, it was more difficult for the human army to cross the enemy's corpses and the complicated terrain. Under the coordination of strategy and tactics, the human side gained a huge advantage and quickly broke through the first line of defense of the mutants. However, as the war progressed, this situation didn't last for long. The King of the Mutants. That was the first enemy that humans had faced in the battle against the mutants in the past 1,000 years. It was also a monster that exceeded common sense and pushed the human race to the brink of extinction. Under the unprecedented ferocious attacks of the humans, The king of the mutants welcomed the challengers in his own way. Under the effect of the ashes, the mutants burst into earth-shattering roars. Their curse reaction increased, and their bodies expanded. Buffs appeared on them one after another. With such support, the situation of the battlefield began to reverse. Damn monsters! Looking at the miracle in the distance, the human soldiers exclaimed. The momentum of their charge couldn't help but come to a halt. In the battle formation, the golden pupils of the Nuo Arya shrunk abruptly. Chapter 596. What is time like an arrow? What is time like a shuttle? What does it feel like to wake up after a few years? In the command room of Tucker Fortress, the blond man looked at the young man in front of him and recalled Luo Ya's past appearance. He had to admit that time had passed, and at the same time, he was surprised by the young man's growth. 2 years ago, Luo Ya hadn't broken through to Source Rank 3. He couldn't even be considered a high-level extraordinary. But now, after saving Kai Yin, the young man had reached Source Rank 2 just like him. Wilhelmina Cornett. It wasn't that Kai Yin didn't know this person. Before he was attacked by fog of concealment and disappeared from the world, he did see the information about the Prince of the Kingdom of Knights becoming a princess. The girl in front of him should be the former Wilhelmina Cornett, but whether it was her strength or attitude, the man was puzzled. The king of a race, that was literally a king that surpassed countries and organizations. It was an existence with the highest authority and status among humans, and it should be the leader of any team. However, in the process of interacting with Luo Ya, Kai Yin discovered that Wilhelmina actually listened to the young man's words. She was even vaguely like a guard, protecting the young man's safety. Kid, did you provoke a woman again? Source Rank 1? You said Nuo Arya is outside. I see. Indeed, Source Rank 1 is an important combat power. It can even determine the rise and fall of a race, especially in this period. Cough cough. Originally, a lot of things had happened in the past 2 years, and it was very difficult to explain. Luo Ya didn't want to waste time explaining. On the other hand, if Kai Yin knew that this Source Rank 1 princess in front of him was in order to save him, he would probably be looked at strangely again. Wilhelmina didn't care much about her own matters, but it made her very uncomfortable when the person she liked was looked down on. In fact, because of the feeling of love me, love my dog, Wilhelmina hated all the bad things about Luo Ya. Uncle Kai Yin, actually, the target of this rescue operation is me. You were injured in order to save me, that's why you're trapped here. Hearing Luo Ya's words, the blond man couldn't help but look at Wilhelmina in surprise, then his eyes were filled with confusion. Seeing this, Luo Ya spoke again. King of the mutants. How is that possible? After Wilhelmina's explanation, Kai Yin's surprise gradually calmed down. His face suddenly became serious, and the atmosphere around him also changed. I understand the general situation. Tell me, what do you want me to do? I see. I understand now. Chapter 597. Coordinating with the enemy from the inside was the strategy that Luo Ya formulated at the very beginning. However, one had to admit that this strategy was almost impossible to achieve when making military decisions without ensuring smooth communication. The grasp of timing was the most important factor in this war. This was a consensus that everyone understood. Therefore, after reorganizing the troops, Luo Ya began to try to scout the outside. Luo Ya had always been confident that Nuo Arya and the others would come. In fact, in order to rescue Luo Ya, the Human Alliance had indeed launched a full-scale attack. On the main battlefield, they had achieved a victory with the help of the reinforcements. He didn't leave and was waiting for Luo Ya's return. This was the fact that the black-haired young man understood. On the other hand, since he could feel the curse power of the Mutants King, it meant that he had recently used a curse, and this was likely triggered by the external reinforcements. Well, although we still need to investigate, according to the time, we can basically determine that it is the Human Alliance. Yes, we are the weakest among the 3 forces, so we need to calm down and wait. But even so, there shouldn't be much time before we attack. The next battle was not only related to each of their lives, but it was also likely to affect the fate of mankind. It could be said that it was of great significance. Tuck Fortress had also made meticulous preparations for this. After half a day, the neat military formation had begun to gather in the square under the tower. The 2 years that were stolen by the fog of concealment was something that these elites couldn't change. However, the next battle would give them the opportunity to prove themselves, and so did the generals who participated in the battle. The second battle? Mina, are you afraid? Yes. Hearing Luo Ye's question, the grey-blue-haired girl raised her head and looked at the white scenery in the distance. The young man beside her wasn't surprised at all because not only Wilhelmina, but even Luo Ye's heart couldn't calm down when he thought about the monsters outside. Well, after all, even if we ignore it, the fear won't disappear. Instead of that, it's better to face it directly from the beginning. That way, our performance on the battlefield will be more stable. But, actually, compared to me, I'm more worried about you. Luo Ye raised her head and looked at Wilhelmina. She saw the greyish-blue-haired girl caressing her chest. She hesitated for a moment before speaking. Indeed, but this time, I'm not fighting alone. That skill will be greatly restricted on the battlefield. That's why I said, don't always sound like you're fighting alone. I'm not that weak, and under Luo Ye's helpless grumbling, Wilhelmina nodded. She extended her hand to grasp the youth's hand. Under Luo Ye's somewhat astonished gaze, she opened her mouth to speak earnestly. All right. In the long history of the Harvey Desert, the kings of Source Level 1 races all had their own unique responsibilities. Faced with these heavy responsibilities, some chose to escape, while others chose to walk down the wrong path. However, for the 3 people in the Harvey Desert, they chose to face it bravely and face it bravely. The King of the Mutants and the 3 kings of Source Rank 1 races. The effect of such a lineup was not as simple as 1 + 1 = 2. It was a perfect pyramid of power, and the top of the pyramid was something that humans did not possess. Direct confrontation wasn't feasible. Under such circumstances, the only way was to take the initiative to lure the enemy. As long as they could stall the mutant's king, there was a possibility of rescuing Luo Ye in the desert battlefield. But in contrast, the human race kings would face a greater risk. Although the depravity and madness of the mutants made them lose their rationality, it did indeed bring them strength. Among them, the most outstanding was the regeneration ability that far exceeded that of normal creatures. Under such an ability, the humans would only lose if they fought a protracted battle. Saint John, the speaker of the scholar country, Antonio, and the king of holy swords, Friedrich, the 3 Source Level 1 powerhouses were waiting for the enemy's arrival. But for the upcoming battle, the 3 old men's expressions were very calm. Feeling the reaction of the spell in the distance, Saint John let out a rare sigh. Antonio and Friedrich looked at each other and nodded at the same time. Antonio and I used to fight together, but that was a long time ago. But even so, the 3 of them resolutely chose to fight this time, and their purpose was more or less the same. You mean Luo Ye? He's a student of our academy, and he's still studying. As the dean, of course, I have to take care of him. Before the battle was about to begin, the 3 Source Level First Kings spoke of their relationship with the black-haired young man. Obviously, they were very optimistic about this successor of the younger generation. After receiving unanimous affirmation, the confidence of the 3 kings was further strengthened. It seems that our vision is quite similar. Rescuing Luo Ye was not only for the sake of the humans, but also in the interest of the 2 kings and even the 2 countries. On the side, Antonio looked at the 2 kings with a smile and said nothing. The scholar country was not a kingdom. Indeed, it didn't have a princess to give away, but it had an ancestor. Thinking of this, Antonio's heart was as calm as water. He felt like he was sitting on a fishing boat. So before the battle, the 3 kings spent a happy time chatting with each other, feeling proud of themselves. It was indeed a good thing to have a good relationship with Luo Ye, but the premise was that the young man could be rescued and the humans still had a future. And for these 2 prerequisites, the 3 kings finally began to take action. It seems that the break time is over. Looking at the first enemy that arrived, Friedrich and Antonio, who couldn't fight against the enemy for a long time in the air, heaved a sigh of relief. Saint John, who had entered battle mode, didn't say a word, but the curse power reaction was getting stronger. For example, the most troublesome, Thunderbird. Facing this monster, Saint Sword King Friedrich couldn't cast a spell. The Sword Demon, which could break through most defenses and make healing ineffective, was very dangerous to Antonio. Above the sky, lightning and holy light entangled and streaked across the horizon. In the plains, two blades overlapped and released endless murderous intent. In the desert, the Space Cursemancer and the giant beast danced together, attacking each other with all their might. In the battlefield between the humans and the mutants, such a problem basically meant that the humans had an advantage. Now that there was an increase of 100%, and most of the troops were the elites of the human race, logically speaking, there was no need to fear the enemy. But looking at the mutants' army, Lillian, Nuo Arya, and Shia Luote had an unusually heavy expression. And the reason was very simple. It was because of the unimaginable pressure. The pressure brought by the mutants' king was, to a certain extent, something that could be called the power of the heavens. In the area where he was the master of heaven and earth. Just by going against him, one would be rejected by the world, and one's body would become heavier. At this moment, in the depths of the mutants' army, a strong warrior was roaring loudly in front of the mutants' king. Waves of powerful curse power surged out from his body. It was the aura of a person who was about to advance to the first level of the source rank. But unlike ordinary mutants, this wasn't a normal advancement, but a gift from the gods. In the fusion of the black liquid, the mutant's body continued to expand, and the curse power rose rapidly. A new head grew out from his body, accompanied by an increasingly powerful aura. He was artificially creating the king of a race. The moment the second brain was fully grown, a new king of the mutants would be born in the world, and this was a nightmare for the humans. Looking at this scene, Nuo Arya and the others made a prompt decision. But after the order was given, it was difficult to execute because it was too late to launch a long-range attack. Just as everyone was in despair, the situation in the desert changed dramatically. The next moment, the fog dispersed, and the majestic fortress reappeared in the world, bringing extreme shock to everyone in the sandstorm. Its name was Tucker Fortress. Chapter 598. Tucker Fortress was the holy land of the theocracy and even the entire human race to some extent. That was the unyielding will that belonged to humans. Although it was just a building, the spirit and meaning it represented were far more than just a building. On the desert, thousands of human warriors raised their heads and looked at the mountain gate that slowly emerged in the white fog, stunned. In the mutated races camp, the beastly roars with surprise continued. Nuo Arya, what's that? The blonde girl who looked up at the distance replied. She thought of something in her intense heartbeat. Lillian and Shia Luote also widened their eyes. However, before the people in the desert could react, the huge fortress made a harsh roar, making everyone's heart tremble. It's the fortress curse vessel. Amidst the loud rumbling in the depths of the white fog, all the human soldiers seemed to have realized something at the same time. Their shouts exploded in the crowd. On the other hand, in the camp of the mutants, the Horde members who had experience in sieging cities roared loudly. Even more monsters were restless. Holy Strike, that was the name of the curse vessel's attack in Tucker Fortress. It was also one of the winning treasures in this ancient city that spanned thousands of years of history to repel sieges again and again. This time, in this desert, it would become the ceremony to start the war and also the horn of counterattack. In the roar that shook heaven and earth, the converging and contracting light suddenly bombarded the mutated race's army from a distance. The flashing light will covered the vision of everyone in the desert at this moment, and it also covered the brilliance of heaven and earth. At the moment when he stretched out his palm, the black spheres that covered the sky quickly gathered in front of him, causing a fierce conflict with the bombarding light. Then, the explosion swept across the desert. Except for the mutated race's king, the rest of the Holy Strike blasted to the ground, triggering an explosion and shaking the mountains. The second explosion was accompanied by a wave of dust that covered the land. The light beam that pierced through the mutants' formation also slowly dissipated in front of the two armies. Such a scene caused the humans to fall silent. Only after a while did they erupt into thunderous cheers. The mutants, on the other hand, were in chaos. Seizing this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, the bugle horn for the human attack sounded at the same time, and the entire army began to charge toward the enemy quickly. On the other side, after the curse vessel was placed on the citadel, the heavy gate of Tucker Fortress was slowly opened. There were bursts of heavy footsteps and unique roars. At the next moment, the two skeletal dragons charged out of the fortress under the watchful eyes of the mutants. They stood side by side and began their assault. The fortress curse vessel was undoubtedly a powerful weapon. However, for the Holy Strike of Tucker Fortress, one problem was inevitable. That was, it couldn't deal with close-range enemies. The moment the gate was opened, the thousands of mutants near the gate roared in unison and began to charge toward the gate. Boom! Luo Ya, who had temporarily become a Bone Dragon Knight, was radiating a blood-red radiance. Looking at the disdainful gigantic beast beneath him, the black-haired young man couldn't help but thank the white-haired sorceress from the bottom of his heart. Chapter 599. God. The specific meaning of this word was already a symbolic noun in today's Shi-Ya. However, as a person who personally experienced the historical fragment, Luo Ya had experienced what a god was more than once. Today, without the 6 disasters in the historical fragment, with the strength of Source Level 2, Luo Ya finally experienced the horror of a god. The majestic curse power spread in the sky, and the density seemed to condense into a solid state. Banger's body floated in the air like a king overlooking the world. From the periphery of the desert to the battlefield in the center, everything in the world was shocked by this divine power. Even the monsters without intelligence had to bow their heads. Because it was not a specific strength, but the gap between the levels. Gritting his teeth and looking at the man in the air, Luo Ya's golden pupils contracted. He resisted the heavy pressure and refused to bow his head. On the entire battlefield, the swords and curse bombardment also stopped. Whether it was humans or mutants, they couldn't move at this moment. High-level transcendents could still stand under the curse power, but many low-level transcendents had to kneel on one knee. The ability of the chosen king? I didn't expect to see a familiar face in this era. Long time no see, Bangar. After so many years, I didn't expect that we would meet again on the battlefield. The voice of the mutant king echoed in Luo Ya's mind, then his gaze fell from the huge skeleton to Luo Ya's body. The moment Luo Ya felt the gaze, his body made a squeezing sound, but even so, the black-haired boy was still unmoved. Instead, he narrowed his golden pupils. Such a thought emerged in Luo Ya's mind. Feeling a little adapted to his body, the boy's mind was filled with the idea of stalling for time. After thinking for a moment, Luo Ya asked with a calm expression. Yes, it is the Savior, and the God I serve. So that's the case, so you are also a member of the Fallen who wants to help him recover, but I have a question, why are you doing this? I've seen the Savior in the historical fragment. Setting him aside, the Savior is now synonymous with depravity and madness. Why do you want to revive him? In the historical fragment, Luo Ya had seen the Savior who had yet to fall. Although Luo Ya hated him and even used all his strength to injure him, in reality, from the perspective of an emperor, the young man had a very high evaluation of the Savior. Instead of calling the mother goddess a ruler, Luo Ya felt that she was more like a mother, or rather, the parent of the entire faction. In fact, the mother goddess side did not have any power struggles. It was very different from the hierarchical and orderly world that the Savior wanted to create. The deity level of the king of the race, this was already the limit that all beings except Shia could reach. Even the fallen Savior could not make it go any further. From the perspective of the race, the mutants had fallen because of the Savior. Normally, they should have completely cut off all ties with him, right? What we are pursuing is not the recovery of the fallen souls, but the true recovery of the Savior. The fall of the Black Moon led to the fall of the Savior, but long before the final battle, the Savior had already predicted his own destruction and rebirth. Upon hearing Banger's words, Luo Ye's eyes widened in an instant. The Gulan Dea also raised his head. Seeing this, the king of the aliens smiled and continued. Chapter 600. Crimson Thunder Roar. This was a skill that Luo Ye obtained with all his might in the earliest historical fragment. It was a relic left behind by Prince Vader who liked him, and it was also one of the most powerful group skills that he had ever seen. That was Shi Ye's blessing. When the crimson lightning pierced through the sky and transformed into specks of light that merged into the bodies of the human warriors, the situation of the entire battlefield changed abruptly. The warriors who could only stretch out their necks to be slaughtered roared in unison and broke free from the suppression of the divine realm. At this moment, the king of the beast men, Bangar, once again realized the necessity of killing Luo Ye. Not only the king's blood, but the ability to change the fate of himself and the people around him and lead them to the impossible was just like the prophecy of the savior in the past. It was a power that must never exist. After a deep and hoarse voice, the spell power on Bangar's body burned fiercely. The gigantic egg of the beast god beside him let out a restless sound and began its second eruption. Strange and evil roars echoed in the sky. At the same time, countless silt sprayed across the entire desert like a volcanic eruption. In just a few seconds, an army of hundreds of thousands of black mutants began to form rapidly. Bangar, who witnessed this scene, spoke again. Is that so? Is this your speech as the leader of a defeated race? I'll leave this to you guys. Wait for my return, dear. The moment the egg of the beast god was unearthed and the king of the beast men unleashed his divine realm in an attempt to eliminate the main forces of the humans, the nature of this rescue operation had completely changed and turned into a direct battle. Under the premise of starting a war with the king of the beast men, this might be the best time to defeat him. At least for now, the situation on the battlefield was still balanced as though the stage was specially set up for Luo Ye's final battle. Sensing this change, Lillian finally understood why she was asked to provide full support. With the addition of the black guys, the number of people on both sides is about the same. We also have group skills. We can do it. We can't let you vomit like this anymore. Ancient bloodline, perish completely. Is it suppressed? I also think that the dark clouds should be changed, Pay Taylor. In the Earth Mother's response, the ground where Luo Ye stood suddenly rumbled and as though responding, the young man's body erupted in flames. At the next moment, a volcano erupted in the desert. The loud noise attracted the attention of everyone on the battlefield. Bangar couldn't help but widen his eyes slightly. In the lava, the curse of the King of Mutants was broken. The dark clouds dispersed, and Roher, who was under the protection of the crowned stone, rushed to the sky unharmed. Chapter 601. Mortals Challenging the Gods. This was a popular scene in the stories of Luo Ye's previous life. It was also one of the core beliefs of the ancient race who adhered to the idea of man conquering nature. The existence of the gods was different from the fantasy in Luo Ye's previous life. They existed in reality and were difficult to defy. Rather than saying that they were a mysterious symbol, it was more appropriate to say that they were a qualitative change after reaching the limits of living beings. That was why they were even more difficult to overcome. Even if Luo Ye didn't acknowledge Bangar's position as the king of the beast men, even if he scoffed at Bangar's choice to abandon his race, he still knew that there were some things that Bangar couldn't compare to. And that was the mastery of spells that Bangar had honed over the years and the level of the gods. The crisp sound of glass shattering sounded from the center of the sphere of chaos. Under Luo Ye's command, the evil god who was laughing delightfully struck the black-haired young man's soul. Adavia pinched the drifting soul fragments between her fingertips and held them in her mouth. Then, she became even more excited. What are you doing? Gazing at Luo Ye's drifting soul, the Witch Queen's expression changed instantly. Her scarlet eyes glared angrily at the intoxicated evil god. Facing such a witch, Adavia explained while looking at the silent young man. Nothing. What a joke. Damaging your own soul? Are you crazy? My opponent is that kind of guy. I have no choice but to do this. But, that's all. Compared to when I was with those calamities, it's still not bad, right? Heh. Gazing at the Spirit King, who narrowed her eyes and said so, the white-haired witch revealed a doubtful expression. The gigantic skeleton remained silent. Under Adavia's reminder, the black-haired young man who recalled the past nodded and burst out an unimaginable spell power. Damage to the soul was nothing new for Luo Ya. In the historical fragment, the soul of the black-haired young man had almost completely dissipated. However, with the assistance of the Spirit King, Luo Ya's soul could be controlled. The barrier between Source Level 2 and Source Level 1 was broken through in an instant. Under the effect of life facing death, the black-haired young man's strength rapidly approached the level of a god. The curse power in his body also erupted and surged toward the giant skeleton. When the witch and the Spirit Tribe King left, Wheel of Time, the defensive curse vessel, dissipated, Luo Ya's defense suddenly dropped to the lowest point. However, this was not because the young man's curse power was out of control. On the contrary, it was Luo Ya's order, and the reason was simple. Chapter 603. Strictly speaking, the ability of prophecy wasn't a spell. Even with the power of a spell, the prophecy might not be activated after a certain ritual was completed. On the contrary, when it was activated, the caster might not have done anything at all. Therefore, strictly speaking, this was something similar to the intuition of a high-level extraordinary. However, the time it took to sense it was much longer and the matter wasn't related to the caster. But no matter what, one thing was certain. The stronger one's strength and talent, the more likely it was for them to complete the prophecy. From this perspective, the two extremes that fought in ancient times could be said to be blessed by the heavens in this aspect. But looking at it this way, the Mother Goddess also had the same conditions and there was no reason for her followers to not retaliate. And the result was the current situation. The sky turned from day to night in a very short period of time. The sun set and the silver moon hung high in the sky. The sudden change in the environment had almost destroyed the common sense of the people. The people in the battle had no choice but to stop and observe the situation. In the sky above the desert, the silver mist was rapidly colliding with the floating egg of the beast god, and rapidly devouring the power of the black sphere. Facing the fog of concealment of the Mother Goddess's camp, the egg of the beast god, that was created to resist it let out a deafening roar and fought back with all its might. Remember, amidst the deafening roar of the beast, countless black sludge rushed out of the egg of the beast god, and transformed into thousands of flying monsters. They covered the sky and rushed toward the fog of concealment, like a flock of birds. In the silver mist, the monsters produced by the egg of the beast god weren't erased immediately. Instead, they constantly launched attacks to disperse the silver mist. This undoubtedly meant that the fog of concealment's devouring ability wasn't working well. However, as a disaster that had run rampant for thousands of years, the fog of concealment wasn't suppressed. Instead, it launched a counterattack in an unexpected way. Under Luo Ya's astonished gaze, countless figures began to appear in the rolling silver mist. They were similar to the bone dragon that Altacia took out from the mist, but the species was more complicated. The chaotic battle between the two factions in the sky began. The black deformed creatures sprayed mud, corroding the bodies of the undead creatures. On the other side, the undead army of various races displayed their various abilities. The skeletal dragons breathed, the winged ones extracted curses, and the gargoyles tore the bodies of the monsters apart in various ways. Such a scene could be said to be completely out of everyone's expectations, especially the sudden appearance of the hidden mist. As the initiator of the extremely influential Tucker Fortress incident, its appearance had aroused the panic of many soldiers led by the Tucker Fortress guards. Fortunately, because of the fierce battle between the egg of the beast god and the egg of the beast god, the chaos of the humans did not last for too long. Quick! Take this opportunity to get rid of them, the generals shouted. At the same time, in the human camp, the red-haired girl also issued an order. The bugle horn sounded, and in the midst of the bugle horn, the human army began to clean up the black monsters while gradually retreating. On the other side, the mutated army also began to retreat. The Nuo Aria in the sky emitted a light, bombarding the monsters in the sky while trying to get closer to Luo Ya. After the king of the mutated race retreated, Wilhelmina, who had stopped the battle, also began to rush towards Luo Ya's position. The egg of the beast god was indeed a product that surprised Luo Ya. At one point, the black-haired youth even felt that it was more troublesome than the king of the mutated race. However, it had to be said that the monsters it produced were not that strong. Watching the two monsters attacking each other in the sky, under the illumination of the silver moon, the youth's eyes flickered and his expression was complicated. This ancient disaster was bound to appear, it was only a matter of time. This was Luo Ya's thought at that time, but he did not expect it to come in such a grand manner, even reversing the sun and moon. However, what he really cared about was not the majestic appearance, but the timing of the fog of concealment's arrival. Such a thought emerged in his mind, making the black-haired youth uncontrollably restless. Bangar, that was a true god. Although it seemed to be an understatement, but in fact, in order to defeat him, Luo Ya had paid a huge price, almost pushing himself to the edge of life and death. Therefore, when the egg of the beast god appeared again, Luo Ya's heart was constantly on alert, because he no longer had the ability to fight. Perhaps because of the danger and high difficulty of this operation, Nuo Arya and the others seemed to have found trustworthy people. Although they were far away, Luo Ya saw many familiar figures in the army. To be honest, when he saw such an army, Luo Ya's feelings in his heart were indescribable. Of course, there were many reasons for coming to Luo Ya's rescue. It was not only personal feelings, but more importantly, Luo Ya's value. But even so, they were betting their lives to open up a way for Luo Ya. In fact, if it were not for their help, Luo Ya would not have the chance to fight one-on-one with the king of the mutated race. Just this point alone determined Luo Ya's choice. At the moment when he decided to fight, this thought flashed through Luo Ya's mind. However, just as he was about to take action, the world suddenly changed. Chapter 604. The disappearance of Ari Lisi could be said to be the worst news Luo Ya had heard since he returned to the modern world. However, due to his own bad situation, Luo Ya forced himself not to think about this matter until he found traces of Ari Lisi in the fog of concealment. That was what Luo Ya thought before, but when he saw Ari Lisi again, the black-haired boy realized that this idea might be wrong. When he saw the silver-haired girl with red eyes above the flashing aurora, Luo Ya couldn't help but exclaim out loud. At the same time, he once again used his curse power to rush into the sky. Wait. Stop. The Witch Queen's voice was anxious, and the evil god suggested in a rare serious tone. However, even so, Luo Ya still couldn't control himself at this moment. But what he didn't expect was that he didn't even attract the girl's attention when he rushed into the sky. Originally, Luo Ya thought that Ari Lisi was controlling the 6 disasters. In this case, it was normal for fog of concealment to intervene in the battle before Luo Ya and the egg of the beast god started fighting. After all, if it was Ari Lisi, she would definitely do her best to protect Luo Ya. Remember, if it was really to save Luo Ya, then not to mention the action, the concern in her eyes couldn't be hidden, but the silver-haired girl who appeared didn't even look at him from beginning to end. These two possibilities appeared in Luo Ya's mind, and the black-haired boy was in a dilemma for a moment. After all, if Ari Lisi deliberately ignored Luo Ya for some reason, such as the mother goddess's surveillance, then rushing over now might put the girl in a disadvantageous position. However, the next moment, the girl used her own actions to help Luo Ya make a judgment. From Luo Ya's current position, although the target of the light of engulfment was the beast-headed giant, it would undoubtedly involve Luo Ya. And with the boy's current fragile state, his life might even be in danger under such an attack. When he realized this, Luo Ya's heart suffered an unimaginable impact. He widened his eyes and stopped moving, even forgetting to defend himself. However, the silver-haired girl's expression didn't change at all. In the historical fragment, the black-haired boy once used this as his final trump card to successfully reverse the situation. Because of this, the flashing light became one of the rare 6 disasters that was close to Luo-Ya. However, it had to be said that those were just beautiful dreams after all. The aurora that gathered countless light spots shot out, and the moment his vision turned into a white light, Luo-Ya remembered to defend himself. Unfortunately, the situation was far worse than what the boy expected. Light of engulfment, that was a disaster that greedily devoured all curse power. It was also the most dangerous attack among the 6 disasters. Because it was light itself, it was almost impossible to dodge if one didn't anticipate it in advance. On the other hand, all curse power defenses would quickly be devoured and disintegrated under the impact of the light. The golden light was like a god's spear, rapidly devouring the beast-headed giant's shield. Facing this situation, the beast-headed giant roared, but it was futile. In just a few seconds, the wave-like light broke through the egg of the beast god's defense and completely engulfed it. The curse power barrier was easily shattered. The black-haired boy desperately tried to mobilize the power of the crown stone, but because of the damage to his soul, he could only release a little cold air. Luo-Ya. No. Nuo Arya, don't use curse power. Chapter 605. On the battlefield, the roars of the beasts continued. There was a slight smell of blood in the wind. Billowing smoke rose from the ground in the distance. Sniffing the smell in the air and looking at everything in front of her, the silver-haired girl couldn't help but be slightly stunned. It was as if she had returned to the battlefield in ancient times where all races bet their fates. Corpses, fresh blood, endless conflicts, fallen giants, fallen angels, and roaring gods. Roughly speaking, these were the things that appeared in Carwen's mind the most. But in contrast to such a heavy and heroic scene, the reason why Carwen's thought of these things was simple. It was just that they were more eye-catching. Such thoughts were the reason why the girl was able to extract impressions from those distant memories. If others were to hear these words, they would definitely be criticized as cruel and callous, or even despise life. However, in reality, this was not the case. The girl's reaction to this was only because these memories were filled with a sense of nothingness, like rootless duckweed. She knew but could not understand anything. Thinking about this, the silver-haired girl shook her head and looked at the battlefield where the beast-headed giant was fighting with the hidden fog. Her red eyes were filled with a hint of surprise. This wasn't normal. Instead, it was a standard anomaly. The reason why the girl could say so was very simple. Because not long ago, she was also one of the many humans. But even so, the only thing Eliza could remember was her name. She didn't have much of a sense of her body and didn't have much sympathy for the humans on the battlefield. After all, the current Eliza had very vague memories of her time as Eliza, and this was inevitable. 1 second to remember. The memories of countless years were too vast. It was far more than the 10 years when the girl was a human. Because of this, the memories when she was a human were scattered. Until now, she still couldn't piece them together. However, Ari didn't care. After all, their standpoints had changed. Both sides were just enemies. In such a situation, what could she do when she remembered the memories when she was a human? It would only add to her troubles. What she had to do next wouldn't change. It was a natural reaction from the power that once belonged to the mother goddess in her body. It was a natural disgust towards the power of the savior. Even if she abandoned these, the egg of the beast god was still a deformed object created by the enemy. This thought flashed through the girl's mind, but she wasn't surprised. After all, Ari was certain that she was a genius among humans. Ari had already expected someone to call her name before she came here, so she didn't waver. But, for some reason, the moment she heard this voice, her originally calm heart suddenly became inexplicably unsettled. The moment she discovered this, her scarlet eyes couldn't help but widen slightly. She tried her best to control herself from turning her head. However, because of this distraction, the direction of the tide of light changed slightly. The Ari Lisi noticed this and hurriedly corrected it. However, the direction of the impact did not immediately change. Fortunately, the main mission was completed. Thinking of this, Ari Lisi put down her hand, but the irritation in her heart did not disappear. She couldn't help but glance in the direction of the sound, but her line of sight was completely blocked by the tide of light. "No, wait, what am I doing? I'll leave the rest to you." The next moment, the silver-haired girl stepped forward and completely disappeared in the flickering light in the sky. In the slightly dim corridor, a spatial crack formed by dense curse power suddenly appeared. Light footsteps could be heard from within. Not long after, a silver-haired girl with scarlet eyes walked into the corridor from the spatial crack. She stopped and looked around and took a deep breath. Perhaps because she inherited part of the mother goddess power, Ari Lisi felt very close to this place. Returning here could be considered as returning home. However, compared to when she left, the girl's expression was a bit strange. According to common sense, the silver-haired girl shouldn't have left after that attack. Instead, she should have continued to command the complete destruction of the egg of the beast god. After all, compared to leaving it to the 6 calamities, with limited intelligence, this was safer. But for some reason, the girl couldn't help but want to escape from there, just like a child who didn't dare to be seen by others after doing something wrong. That was, as a human, her biological parents had already passed away. She remembered that she was already scheduled to be adopted by another family. Putting aside her appearance, the young girl's personality alone was definitely not cute. In fact, she was even a little cold. As for the family that adopted her, the young girl didn't feel that she could open her heart to them. This was because Alisa remembered that the reason why her father died was to protect the head of the noble family that adopted her. And so, these were the thoughts that Ari Lisi had all along. However, after going to the battlefield and hearing that call, the silver-haired girl's thoughts started to waver. Thinking of this possibility, the girl frowned and her heart became more and more chaotic. But before Ari Lisi could clear her thoughts, a series of footsteps came from behind her. The silver-haired girl turned around and saw a maid whose body was a wooden puppet. Although this building was recreated from the memories of the mother goddess, in fact, the mother goddess was in a deep sleep most of the time. The ones in charge of managing the divine tower were these puppets, and the only guest was Ari Lisi. Chapter 606. Since ancient times, the history of mankind had evolved through war and peace. The end of a large-scale battle would often trigger a series of chain reactions. As for the degree of reaction, it would depend on the size of the battle and the situation of each country at that time. That's why Luo is my subject. Don't you understand? Currently, the few of them were in the middle of the battlefield. The aurora, that destroyed the egg of the beast god, in the sky had yet to disappear. Although the hidden fog, that once attacked the humans was severely injured, it had yet to disappear. With these two monsters occupying the sky, the humans below were under great pressure. Although the battle with the mutants had come to an end, the situation was actually more critical in terms of danger. This was because whether it was Nuo Arya, Shia Luote, or Lillian, Williams, and the others who understood the situation of the Royal Selection Tribe, they all knew one thing: the relationship between the Royal Selection Tribe and the 6 calamities. Although the egg of the beast god was despicable, it was a means to balance the battlefield. Previously, it was still fine when it fought with the 6 calamities, but now that one side was defeated, the danger index of the humans rose sharply. In order to avoid this situation, the girls thought of the idea of breaking out of the encirclement separately. Because of this problem, the few people who retreated quickly under the protection of the army gathered together. The first to attack was Nuo Arya, who was flying in the sky. As the monarch of Luo the blonde girl strongly requested to leave the young man in her care. However, the other 3 rejected this request. Remember, no. In the face of the blonde girl's proposal, the 3 of them objected in unison. The reddish-haired girl's reaction was the most intense. After all, Luo was in Shia Luote's hands, so she was the first to refute. After pausing for a moment, Xia Luote became emotional. She controlled the golden soul to wrap around Luo Yue and moved quickly. At the same time, she pointed at the Battle Angel Square behind her. TSK. The blonde girl was defeated in the first round. Xia Luote heaved a sigh of relief. However, before the girl could rejoice, Lillian suddenly approached and stared coldly at Xia Luote, who claimed to be her fiancé. What? What a joke. Lillian, are you crazy? Have you forgotten Emperor Lucas's orders? Hand it over to you. Your Austin Empire is the most suspicious, okay? Over the past 2 years, Lillian's power had not weakened at all. On the contrary, it had become even more powerful, especially in the eastern region. Even Emperor Lucas might not be able to do anything to her. No, I don't agree with this decision. Lillian, although your 10 cities can protect Luo Yue, you are the owner of the King's blood, right? How can 2 possessors of the King's blood be in the same team? Isn't that twice as attractive to the 6 disasters? Upon hearing Wilhelmina's words, Lillian's expression stiffened. In an instant, she was at a loss for words. And after pondering carefully, she had to admit that the grey-blue-haired young lady's words made sense. Chapter 607. It was an indisputable fact that Luo Yue Akut had a rich experience in dreaming. The black-haired boy was helpless in this situation, but he couldn't change anything. In fact, Luo Yue didn't hate this situation. After all, if he could dream, at least it meant that he was still alive. What's wrong? Daddy? Looking at the little girl who was happily holding his hand, Luo Yue blinked. After hesitating for a moment, he shook his head, and some doubts flashed in his heart. What's going on? Who is this child? At this time, the girl who was happily smiling in front of Luo Yue was only 4 or 5 years old, but her appearance was already very promising. Not to mention her soft black hair, her facial features were also too delicate. So cute, no, should I say beautiful? This gaze. Daddy, do you like me? Phut, I'm just kidding. Daddy is so serious, ha 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 ha. Looking at the child who suddenly held her stomach and laughed, Luo Yue muttered in his heart. He raised his head and looked at the familiar white holy city wall in the distance, and then he couldn't help but be stunned. This is the holy city. The color of the city wall is very special. Daddy, you should be familiar with it, right? Looking at the nearby vendors, the black-haired boy said with a puzzled expression. As the capital of the Holy Church, Luo Yue had been to the most, except for Akut City, but the problem was that he had never been to a commercial street like this. Even if he wanted to buy something, the Akut family only needed to contact the Sorofia Merchant Association, and then President Alvin, who had dealt with Luo Yue before, would arrange everything properly. He was simply a delivery specialist. Looking at the girl in front of him, Luo Yue slightly narrowed his eyes. To be honest, the boy couldn't imagine that he would forget such a little girl with such obvious characteristics. Not to mention the appearance that stunned Luo Yue, the most important thing was the girl's hair and eyes color. Could it be that I imagined a daughter out of thin air? Daddy, what are you thinking about? Really, it's rare to have a chance to go shopping together. Let's go. Thinking so, the black-haired boy sighed and began to walk along the girl's lead. The nearby vendors gradually opened, and there were more and more shouting on both sides. Miss, how about an apple? It's a special apple from the eastern region. It's very sweet. Eastern region? You really know how to brag. Thinking of this, Luo Yue's face showed displeasure. He didn't want to pay the IQ tax to the unscrupulous peddler. However, looking at the girl's shining eyes below, the black-haired boy fell silent. Daddy. In less than 2 seconds, the black-haired young man was defeated. Upon hearing Luo Yue's words, the girl happily threw herself into his arms. It's nothing. I'll buy it if I want it. It's just that there are no apples planted in the eastern region, so, At this time, the girl lowered her head slightly, not knowing what she was thinking. However, the atmosphere around her was a little strange. making Luo Yue feel an inexplicable sadness. But before he could ask for more details, she raised her head again. Oh, sure. So it's like that. After the apple, Luo Yue accompanied the girl to a lot of places, from the more serious clothing stores, jewelry stores, and roadside stalls. And as the number of places they went increased, Luo Yue's hands became heavier and heavier. But in the face of the girl in front of him, for some reason, Luo Yue had no resistance at all. Or rather, every time he saw her happy face, he even wanted to buy more. Daddy, come here. After thinking for a long time, Luo Yue suddenly realized something, but before he could think carefully, he was pulled by the girl to a new stall. But this time, the goods were a bit strange. All of them were obviously damaged second-hand weapons and armor. These things were picked up from the eastern region. Don't look bad. In the past, they were all used by nobles. Maybe they are relics that a great noble is looking for. If they were really relics from the eastern region of the last Holy War, then they should have been buried in the ground for at least 80 years. How could they look like they were only used for a few years? Even if you want to cheat a fool, you can't cheat like this, right? Wait, isn't this a new standard armor? It's not an antique from 80 years ago. This. Didn't you say that they were picked up from the eastern region? What, do you know the owner of this thing? Then hurry up and buy it, before the corpse is transported back. The corpse of a victim of the Holy War, what's going on? You don't even know this. Looking at the frowning stall owner, Luo Yue's eyes widened and fell into silence. Daddy. This is boring, let's go. Wait, if I think about it carefully, even if the streets may be pieced together from my other memories, there is no such situation where I directly communicate with the stall owner of the market. I have also never seen equipment from the battlefield being sold. These things shouldn't be made out of nothing in a dream, right? After all, it's strange to be awake in a dream, right? Is this really my dream? Really? It's all Daddy's fault for thinking so much. Can't we continue to play like this? Well, Daddy is right, this is actually my dream. Originally, Ackett Hill, where Grandfather lived, was the place I went the most in the theocracy, but there were too many changes there, so I can't use it. I just didn't expect the holy capital to have so many flaws. What a big failure. Well, I'm not Daddy's fantasy, I'm Daddy's real daughter. You can tell by looking at my eyes and hair, right? Hearing the girl's words, Luo Yue suddenly widened his eyes, then hurriedly squatted down and looked at the girl with the same black hair and golden eyes. Even if it's a time curse, it's too difficult to go back to the past, but if it's a form similar to precognitive dreams, the difficulty will be greatly reduced. As if hearing Luo Yue's thoughts, the black-haired girl happily nodded, and Luo Yue's mood suddenly became excited. He looked at the girl in front of him and couldn't help but ask the question that he had been ignoring. No, although I really want to tell Daddy my name, I can't, it will cause some troublesome effects. Well, that's right, that's why I've been holding back from telling Daddy, but, even so, Daddy still brought me to play. Saying so, Luo Yue stretched out his hand to touch the girl's cheek, but he didn't expect that before he could touch her, the black-haired girl took the initiative to rub against him like a kitten. Seeing this situation, Luo Yue was slightly stunned, and couldn't help but feel warm in his eyes, but after thinking for a moment, he still asked the question that he was most concerned about. Luo Yue smiled bitterly with a helpless expression. Although Luo Yue was almost certain that the girl in front of him was his child, because the hair and eyes of the two were too similar, Luo Yue couldn't infer the child's mother. As for the appearance. Is that so? Then forget it. By the way, using such a dangerous method like time curse to see me in my dream, is there something important? Time curse, that was a powerful curse that humans hadn't even touched the threshold of. Normally, such a curse couldn't be cast by a girl of a few years old, even in a dream. But now that it had been cast, it must be meaningful. No, although there are some other purposes, but if it's just me, I just want Daddy to accompany me for a day. Looking at the girl who showed a somewhat forced smile, Luo Yue's eyes were filled with confusion, and then an indescribable sense of apology gushed out from his heart. No. It's not Daddy's fault, it's because of some things, so. That is. Seeing the gradually shattering dream world, the black-haired girl sighed, and Luo Yue also understood the meaning of this situation. Well, it seems like it's going to end, Daddy. Facing the girl who said so with a somewhat sorrowful smile, the black-haired boy fell into silence, and suddenly, there was a slight pain in the depths of his heart. This knowledge made Luo Yue's heart heavy. After thinking for a moment, Luo Yue put his hands on the girl's shoulders and said softly, "Daddy, I know you may think that my words are baseless, but this is the truth. It's impossible for me not to like such a cute daughter. I apologize in advance for not spending enough time with you. If it's possible, I will definitely change." In Luo Yue's apology, the black-haired girl's expression suddenly distorted, and then she couldn't help but choke with sobs. Seeing this situation, the black-haired boy panicked for a moment, but before he could say anything, the girl regained control of her emotions, and the surrounding scenery became more and more distorted as time passed. "What? Well, I understand. Then it's settled." The boy said so, holding the girl's outstretched hand, and the black-haired girl's face revealed a satisfied smile with tears. The next moment, Luo Yue's eyes flashed, and his consciousness returned to the world. Chapter 608. Normally, dreams would not leave behind many memories. This was common knowledge. However, today, the young man unexpectedly discovered that even if it was a dream, it would still leave an impression in people's memories, especially when he had a daughter out of nowhere. It was the figure of a young girl who was hugging him in front of her. Her long black hair was draped over her shoulders, forming a strong contrast with her fair skin. She had a small and perky nose, cherry lips that made one want to kiss, and amethyst-like eyes that revealed an inexplicable mystery. Her entire aura was both noble and inexplicably cold. "Aya, you're finally awake." "Yep, it's me." Feeling the excitement in his heart, Luo Yue suddenly got up and hugged the young girl. Lillian was slightly stunned for a moment before she smiled and hugged him back. For a long-distance relationship that hadn't seen each other for a long time, there was no need for words the moment they met. All they needed was each other's warmth. For Luo Yue and Lillian, there was also the resonance of being blood-related. Senior, how have you been for the past year? Because I entered a historical fragment, so. Senior. Lillian had always been the most reliable existence in Luo Yue's heart. She was even stronger than Nuo Arya, who was outstanding in all aspects except for XP. After all, Miss Angel was restricted by the Holy See, and there were many things that she couldn't do. However, Lillian was almost completely independent in the Austin Empire's venomous insect breeding. She was a reliable and mature woman who was also extremely intelligent. Most importantly, the two of them were blood-related and couldn't betray each other. It could be said that she was the person Luo Yue trusted and relied on the most since he came to this world. However, such a young girl actually said the word despair. "Senior, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. Although that's the case, I've made you suffer for the past year. If that's the case, no matter what excuse you use, it's still my fault. Although it's indeed a painful time when I think about it, I'm not that unreasonable. Besides, you've actually left me with the motivation to continue living." Looking at the black-haired, purple-eyed young girl, Luo Yue was momentarily confused. Seeing this, Lillian gently stroked her lower abdomen and revealed a blissful smile. After the main strategic objective of the Scorched Earth campaign was accomplished, under the joint command of the four girls, the emergency communication system had already begun to transmit information to all parties, and the faint troops were organized to retreat in an orderly manner. "Your Holiness, we have successfully retreated from the battlefield. May I ask if you need to send someone to support us? If possible, can you tell us the approximate location?" Gazing at the liaison officer in the projection, the white-haired old man lifted his head and asked casually. Upon hearing this question, the King of Sword, who was stopping the bleeding on his leg, came to a halt. Antonio, who sat by the side and hugged his staff, couldn't help but lift his head and look over. "I see. Very good. Thank you for your hard work." Then according to the rules, We'll contact each other again after 12 hours. After a brief reply, the influence disappeared. John of the Holy See turned around and smiled. Yes, this is an unexpected piece of good news. Thanks to this, the graduation ceremony will probably be more lively, the old man said with a serious expression. Antonio shook his head helplessly at his old friend's stubbornness. What? Looking at the white-robed old man, Antonio asked with a serious expression. John, who heard this, was silent for a moment and shook his head. The king of the mutants was defeated by Luo-Ya single-handedly. The king of the mutants, Bangar, was the king of the race that existed in ancient times. He had definitely reached the realm of the deities. Although his strength might have faded after a long time, he was definitely not someone an ordinary level 1 source level could deal with. And for Luo-Ya to be able to defeat him, it meant that his peak combat strength was comparable to the deities. Humans finally have a deity-level powerhouse. If it was during peacetime, the rulers who were solely focused on maintaining their ruling position would probably pay extra attention to Luo-Ya's existence and even regard him as a great enemy. But for the human race that was now on the verge of extinction, even if it was incomplete, it was still a great thing to have a powerhouse that could fight against the deities. Putting aside John of the Holy See, Antonio was the dean of the school who had taken care of Luo-Ya a lot. Both of them also had the common goal of resurrecting Estrella. Friedrich was an original member of the Evening Sage Association and was also the descendant of the knight left behind by Luo-Ya's ancestors. The growth of the black-haired young man made the three of them feel relieved. However, humans did not have much time to breathe because after the mutants, the problems that followed were even more serious. If that light is the 6 disasters, then the threat of the Mother Goddess can be regarded as greater than that of the Savior, at least on the surface. Well, it seems that we have to free up our hands and balance out both sides. Although the threat of the mutants was a conflict between races, its essence was still the aftermath of the resurrection of the Savior. After the death of the mutants' king, the threat level of the mutants to the humans had decreased. On the contrary, the 6 disasters that had been ignored by the humans had stepped onto the stage. The destruction of the 3-race alliance in the prophecy must come from the Mother Goddess or the Savior. Then, there was only one thing that the humans, who were the weakest, could do, and that was to be the third force to balance out the power of the Mother Goddess. Of course, this situation was only limited to theory. If the humans tried to control this ancient battle with their bodies, sooner or later, they would anger one of the parties. But even so, the strategy of balance could buy the humans a lot of time, so that the younger generation would have enough time to grow. John of the Holy See withdrew his gaze and looked at the other 2 old men. Both of them had a determined expression on their faces. The emergency contact said that we should go back as soon as possible. Then let me use the transfer spell. The old men chatted and laughed as they prepared for their return. And with this as the beginning, the conflict between the humans and the Mother Goddess became more and more inevitable. Baby. Luo-Ya naturally didn't need to explain the meaning of the word baby since she didn't have any communication barriers. But she had to admit that this news was too sudden, so Luo-Ya couldn't react in time. Wait, could it be that? Yes, that should be our baby. Where is it? It's right in front of you. Gazing at Lillian, who smiled helplessly and stroked her belly, Luo-Ya widened her golden eyes. The black-haired, purple-eyed young lady smiled and said, "That's right." Lillian recalled last night's experience. After quickly retreating from the battlefield and confirming that the 6 disasters weren't pursuing them, she fell asleep for a moment. It was also at that moment that she dreamed of a blurry figure of a child. Not only that, but it was also because of her reminder that I was able to lead the troops here. Could it be that she wants to use the time curse to try and change something? Gazing at Lillian, Luo-Ya couldn't help but put up a stern expression. If it weren't for the interference of the time curse, Lillian wouldn't have gone all out in this battle. In other words, in the desert, the human forces would be reduced by nearly half. In that case, everyone's fate would change. Was it a serious injury? Or was it, Senior Luo-Ya, have you been using spells to maintain the child's state for the past 2 years? Recalling Wilhelmina, who had reached the source level 1, Lillian let out a helpless sigh. But in fact, she didn't feel much regret. Even though considering Luo Ya and Lillian's situation, there shouldn't be any issues with the child's appearance and talents, Lillian's motherly love overflowed uncontrollably when she saw such an adorable child who was considerate of her parents. No, that's the result of pregnancy vomiting. The spell froze my body's state in that period. But even so, I'm almost at my limit. The spell is depleting faster than I expected. I'm afraid there's less than a year left. When the time comes, the matter will surely be exposed. Even though Luo Ya didn't know the reason, he was wary of the royal family. In order to keep Lillian away from Luo Ya, he didn't hesitate to transfer her to the border. In such a situation, it was hard to imagine that he would allow their child to be born successfully. At this thought, Luo Ya asked with a stern expression. After a few moments of silence, Lillian answered, "I see." Even though Luo Ya didn't know the exact strength of Lillian's forces due to her disappearance, it was apparent from her 400,000 troops. And with so many people gathered together, perhaps even Lillian couldn't stop them. Most importantly, Lillian's idea wasn't delusional. On the contrary, she had a high chance of winning. After all, even in the Austin Empire, which had a huge population, 400,000 elite troops at the border was a huge force. With this alone, Lillian could crush the other two heirs. The only obstacle was the current emperor. After pondering for a few moments, Lillian stated her goal. Luo Ya nodded in understanding. "Senior sister, what do you plan to do if things don't go well?" Upon hearing Luo Ya's question, Lillian pondered for a few moments before letting out a sigh. Then, she gazed at the young man and curled the corners of her lips. On the other hand, Luo Ya widened his eyes slightly before nodding with a smile. Aggrieved? "I don't think so. Besides, it's not just me." Yes, it's our family." I will. Definitely." Luo Ya nodded and looked at Lillian as though he was making an oath and made a second promise. Chapter 609. Luo Ya believed that every battle had its own rewards. However, unlike the past, the black-haired young man had other rewards this time. Listening to the gentle breathing of the young lady, feeling the warmth of her body and the texture of her skin, the black-haired young man had a gentle expression on his face. He stared at the sleeping face of the elf lady beside him and couldn't help but think about the past few days. Although Wilhelmina only chatted with Luo Ya that night and stayed by her bedside, the other three young ladies still rolled their eyes at the black-haired young man. However, compared to the recent situation of the human alliance, these were all small matters. The real big thing was the return of St. John and the others. At the same level, the mutants' regenerative ability was far superior to the humans. Therefore, the humans would fall into a difficult battle. This law applied even to the Source Level 1 mutants. After battling with the 3 Source Level 1 mutants for a day, the 3 famous kings of the humans were all injured. Fortunately, Nuo Arya used the Angel King bloodline ability to corrode and assimilate the curse power. After dealing with this troublesome power, Nuo Arya was able to recover. Until the human army left, the 6 calamities in the distant sky didn't disperse. However, these ancient calamities didn't attack at all. On the other hand, after the victory of the Scorched Earth battle, the entire eastern front line gradually calmed down. Although there were victories and losses between the two sides, the overall gains were far greater than the losses. After Luo Ya defeated one of the 6 calamities, St. John intended to make Luo Ya a saint of the Holy Church. However, before he could confer the title, Luo Ya disappeared completely. At that time, there were still some disagreements within the Holy Church. However, this time, Luo Ya saved hundreds of thousands of people in Tucker Fortress. The situation was completely different. A living saint. This is an extremely rare example in the Roman Curia. Their status is only below that of the Holy See. However, you don't need to work in the Roman Curia. You'll still be free. I can guarantee that. Upon hearing these words, Miss Angel, who originally wanted to use this as an excuse to let Luoya stay in the holy capital, widened her eyes. She couldn't help but stare at the young man with hidden bitterness in her eyes and give up on her idea. After Prince Kai Yin personally expressed his gratitude, he asked about Kadia's condition. It seemed like he wanted to look for this old friend of his to recuperate together. Luoya understood his intentions. After the great victory of the Scorched Earth battle, the strength of the humans and the aliens had completely changed. The crisis of extinction could be said to have been temporarily resolved. After confirming that the 6 disasters didn't make any changes, the entire human alliance was immersed in optimism. The atmosphere was quite relaxed, and it wasn't rare to see people like Kai Yin preparing to rest for a while. This incident can be said to be a turning point. With your help, humans now have the power to fight against God-level existences. Unfortunately, this is only the beginning. That is indeed the case. You want humans to be the third party to balance the power of the Mother Goddess and the Savior? That's almost impossible, right? But even so, the black-haired young man was still conflicted about the idea of Antonio and the others. And the reason was actually known to Luoya. It was because of the memory in the historical fragment. The possibility of going to war with the Mother Goddess was something that Luoya had always forced himself not to think about. But now, it might become something that he had to do for the sake of humans. On the other hand, Luoya had no clue about Ari Lisi, who might be influenced by the Mother Goddess to leave. Hey, give birth. Me. Normally, in order to give birth to children as soon as possible, we should gather more than 100 suitable women and try to give birth on a large scale. But you won't agree to this kind of situation, right? Dean, please don't joke around. This kind of thing is absolutely impossible. Looking at the 2 young ladies who had fallen into anger and could even be said to be overflowing with killing intent, Antonio, who proposed the old rules, revealed a helpless smile. At this moment, Lillian, who had an extremely cold expression, also stood up at this moment. Oh, what do you mean? Just the 3 of you? I understand. It is indeed human nature to give birth to better children, and it is also more likely to nurture talents. But, if we defeat you, it doesn't seem impossible for Her Highness over there, right? As the first source rank one of the younger generation, Wilhelmina was also a woman who had inherited the Holy Sword. In terms of strength, she was impeccable. When it came to outstanding women, it was impossible to avoid her. In fact, Lillian didn't bring her along on purpose from the start to act as a buffer condition for this negotiation. I understand. Then it's just the 4 of us. This is the bottom line. Please give us the respect we deserve, Dean. Don't test us anymore. Perhaps Antonio proposed this for the future of the human race, but the 4 young ladies obviously didn't want to reason with him. Even if the world were to be destroyed tomorrow, Lillian and the others wouldn't tolerate being cuckolded by more than 100 people today. Unless the entire country of scholars ascended and floated out of Shiya, it would be impossible for them to escape their wrath. Facing such a threat, Antonio smiled bitterly. He stole a glance at Friedrich, who didn't say a word, but whose eyes were filled with gratitude. Then, he turned to St. John, who had an "I didn't say anything" expression. Antonio let out a sigh and nodded. Results. Thank you for your understanding. We will do our best. That's right. Up until now, Luoya hadn't said a word about this issue that concerned her. Or rather, she was bewildered. In other words, the 4 of you monopolized my mating rights? After witnessing the entire negotiation process, the young man cursed inwardly. But he didn't have any objections to this outcome. After all, Luoya didn't want to be a breeding animal. Antonio's plan was for the greater good of humanity, so it was difficult for Luoya to reject it. From this perspective, it was most appropriate for the young ladies to reject it. Thinking of this, the young ladies became a little anxious, especially the young lady with reddish-brown hair. She stood up immediately after Antonio left. Xia Luote said with a firm gaze. She chased everyone out and quickly immersed herself in her work. Recalling the torturous experience during the day, The black-haired young man let out a sigh of relief helplessly. He gazed at Xia Luote, who was sleeping beside him, and his heart was filled with tenderness. After the others left, the young lady with reddish-brown hair gazed at Luo Yue. Her emerald eyes reddened instantly, and she pounced on Luo Yue and began to cry bitterly. Looking at Xia Luote in this state, the black-haired young man couldn't help but be moved. It had to be said that among the 4 young ladies, Nuo Arya, Xia Luote, Lillian, and Wilhelmina, Xia Luote, as the fiancée, was the most attached to Luo Yue. This was also the opposite effect of the loyalty, origin substance of the Sorofia family. As long as you loved someone deeply, you would be unswerving until death. So that's how it is. Did I become her weakness and make her imperfect? The long-awaited union exhausted Luo Yue, who was already in poor health. But even so, the young man who loved to the extreme couldn't stop. Fortunately, Xia Luote was weak in this aspect and wasn't Luo Yue's opponent at all. Although Xia Luote said that she was in too much pain, Luo Yue discovered that the young lady's figure didn't change at all. In fact, it even improved. It was simply an unsolved mystery in the world. Thinking so, the young man stared at the young lady's body and fell into deep thought. But before he could think of anything, his eyes were gently covered by a small white hand. Then, the young lady's embarrassed voice sounded. "I'm sorry, but what's there to be embarrassed about now?" Hearing Luo Yue's words, the young lady thought for a moment and put down her hand with a red face. Luo Yue helplessly reached out and hugged the young lady, while Xia Luote leaned on the young man's shoulder with a red face. Then, she began to care about Luo Yue's body. "Yes, I'll leave it to the spirit tribe King Adavaya who signed a contract with me. Don't worry." What does that mean? Because of this, my dear. Do you still remember? Saying so, Luo Yue stretched out his hand and showed the pair of rings. Xia Luote revealed a blissful smile. "Although I don't know the reason, my dear, your fate would occasionally fluctuate strangely. And at those times, I would feel a familiar feeling from the rings. Yes, it's the aura of 6 disasters." Hearing Xia Luote's words, the black-haired young man couldn't help but be stunned. The next moment, he suddenly thought of something and looked at the system abruptly. And just as he expected, the skills in the system that he didn't know about before had updated. Silver Mist Devour, this is. So that's it. Looking at this description, Luo Yue's golden eyes narrowed as he pondered carefully. Chapter 610. Luo Yue had to admit that before seeing the hidden mist, he had never thought of devouring existences. After all, even if it was a spell, there was a limit to what it could do. That's right. The moment Luo Yue saw the side effect of this skill, he understood its meaning. The so-called devouring existence of the Devour of the Silver Mist, side effect should not only refer to his curse power or some other ability, but also himself. It was something similar to the concept of cause and effect, and this should also be the reason why the child could appear. It had been nearly 2 years since Lillian was pregnant. If their daughter really had the ability to travel through time, shouldn't she have been able to meet the girl a long time ago? Although Luo Yue's reminder to Lillian allowed him to avoid some unknown fate, to be honest, Luo Yue felt that this entry point was a little strange. But in fact, the little girl only appeared before Luo Yue when he was surrounded. In the past, Luo Yue thought it was a coincidence, but now it seemed that it might be related to the side effect of the Devour of the Silver Mist skill. With this thought in mind, Luo Yue resolved part of the confusion in his heart. However, this didn't help him recover. After seeing this side effect, Luo Yue understood some of the conditions of his body, such as the fact that his curse power was very low. Luo Yue heaved a sigh of relief that it wasn't a problem with his soul. But then, he became vigilant again because if he speculated according to this situation, the worst outcome of using the Devour of the Silver Mist frequently might even be that Luo Yue would die. It was a side effect that could lead to death. After realizing this, the black-haired young man decided to temporarily seal this ability and thought about how to solve it. But before he could think of anything, he heard the girl beside him recommending herself. Hey, what do you mean? I see. But what should I do? For this kind of thing, you just have to touch it, right? Like now. Wait a minute, won't this affect you? Your body hasn't been in good condition for the past year, right? But, dear, who am I to you? Looking at the serious Xia Luote, after a moment of silence, Luo Ya said the answer she had answered before. Correct, but I hope you won't take so long to think about it next time. Xia Luote, I'm sorry. When I returned from Ross, I wanted to convince my father, but because of the Fallen One's attack on Akate City, I was delayed. That, my dear. Actually, I'm already a member of the Akate family in name. Looking at Xia Luote, the black-haired young man blinked in confusion. Xia Luote hurriedly explained. In order to make up for the damage caused to Xia Luote by hindering their relationship, Dia specially wrote an open letter to admit the marriage between Luo Ya and Xia Luote. She also said that if Xia Luote was willing, the door of the Akate family would always be open to her. Because of this, the girl who was almost in despair at that time received a trace of comfort, and it was also because of this that the girl tried her best to pull herself together and walked out of the shadows to come to the front line. I'm also very grateful. Xia Luote, I hope you can promise me one thing. No matter what happens in the future, don't think about those stupid things anymore, okay? I beg you. Looking at Luo Ya's worried and touched Qingtong, the red-haired girl nodded. The two slowly embraced each other and only separated after a long time. But, you mean? What? My dear, don't tell me you're thinking of me as a vicious woman who hopes that Ari Lizzie will never come back. Yes, we always quarrel, but no matter what, we're still childhood sweethearts, and I owe her one. Uncle Dia acknowledged the marriage, and Ari Lizzie also agreed. When you weren't around, whether it was me, Nuo Arya, or Lillian, everyone relied on each other to barely support our spirits. Also, in name, I'm already her adopted sister. Luo Ya, who understood Xia Luote's thoughts, nodded, and her heart became firm again. After exchanging glances with the girl beside her, Luo Ya slowly released her curse power and gradually merged with Xia Luote. This should be the end, right? Shameless person, I can't believe that you still dare to appear before me again. In a dark castle somewhere, a black-haired man was kneeling on one knee and breathing rapidly. Not far in front of the man was a black-haired beauty. Her skin was whiter than snow, and her eyebrows were picturesque. She had a charm that could steal one's soul, but her tone was extremely cold, and her golden eyes were filled with disdain. Not to mention the wounds all over his body, even the long sword in his right hand that was stabbed into the ground was cracked. Judging from the expensive decorations and the reaction of the curse power, it should be an incredible magic sword. However, even such a weapon didn't allow its wielder to obtain victory. As for the man himself, it was obvious that he was in a state where he was 1 second before collapsing to the ground after challenging an extremely powerful opponent. Fully armed against bare-handed, even so, he was defeated. One could only imagine the overwhelming difference in strength between the two of them. However, even so, the man still seemed unwilling to give up. Please help me, I need you. The man propped himself up and tried his best to speak, but all he received was the black-haired woman's merciless mockery. However, even so, the man didn't give up. Instead, he raised his sword and got into a defensive posture. Communicate. Do you mean that you suddenly came uninvited, and then said something stupid about eliminating hatred and joining hands again? You're challenging my patience limit again and again. Shut up. Shut up. I said, shut up, okay? The moment the black-haired woman said this sentence, the man who kept making suggestions paused. The next moment, as if he was hit by an invisible big hand, his body was sent flying in an instant. He crashed into the wall with the momentum of a cannonball, making a huge roar. The violent roar accompanied by the tremor spread throughout the castle. In the smoke and dust, the woman walked forward and looked at the man who rolled on the ground in a piece of rubble and frowned. Cough, cough, cough. I used to have a cousin. She's a sister from the collateral family. Her hair color is different, and she has very beautiful eyes. Her extraordinary talent is very high, but it can only be regarded as average in our family." Hearing these strange words, the man who fell to the ground fell into silence, and the woman who knocked him down did not pay attention to him. Instead, she said she was not good at fighting, and the god who matched her contract was not the fighting type, so she was always left behind when there was a large-scale operation in the family. However, she was lucky in love and found a good husband. She was very happy at the wedding. She held me, who was still a child, and sang and danced. It's a pity that she died, in the first tragedy caused by your betrayal." Hearing these words, the man's body trembled, and the black-haired woman with golden eyes continued. With each name, the concentration of the curse power around the black-haired woman increased explosively, and the shining armor made a cracking sound. However, in the face of this critical situation, the man did not move. He just apologized with a pale face. "I don't need your cheap apology. I hate you. I hate your family. You are trash, pests of human beings. The current situation is completely retribution, isn't it? Do you think I don't want to kill you? I just don't want to expand my influence and attract the attention of those guys, and you are too weak, and you can't change anything." The woman turned around and said nothing more. She walked into the depths of the castle, but what she heard after such a declaration was not a discouraged sigh behind her, but a provocation with all his might. "Are you kidding me? No, I'm serious." Leaving such words, the woman who was so angry that she laughed turned around and left. The man who insisted also fell down and looked at the stone ceiling of the castle silently. Your Highness," such a thought appeared in his mind, but before he could figure it out, the feeling of his nose being pinched came, and the sudden suffocation made him open his eyes involuntarily. How could that be? Was that a dream? Looking helplessly at Paul, who was awakened, the maid Liz sighed, and then whispered with some vigilance. "Your Highness, please wake up, there is news from Her Highness Lillian." Chapter 6:11. At the dining table in the early morning, Paul Ackman rubbed his brows and listened to the words of the maid beside him. His mind was in a mess. Seeing the black-haired young man like this, the maid Liz showed a speechless expression. "That's why I said no. That's why I can't distinguish reality. Most importantly, this isn't the first time, right? Ah, I remember. Last week, you seemed to have a similar situation and sat on the bed for a long time. I see. So it's a relapse." Hearing Liz's words, Paul couldn't help but have a face full of question marks. He felt helpless, but he didn't care about the maid's words. Part of the reason was that he was an illegitimate child and a heretic excluded by the nobles. The other reason was that Liz's identity was different. No one was willing to be Paul's servant and even regarded him as an inauspicious person. After all, following an illegitimate child was almost equivalent to being exiled for these servants who completely relied on their master. Therefore, Paul didn't care about the sarcasm from such a person at all. Compared to that, the matter of the dream made him feel more strange. Of course, I don't remember. Normal people generally don't remember." Paul looked worried when he said this, and Liz blinked in surprise. Instead of calling it a dream, it was better to say that it was already a deep memory, but it was obviously very abnormal. "That's why I said I didn't bump into anything. How should I put it? The kind that was beaten up." Hearing Paul's strange expression and the content of the summary was even more strange, the maid showed a suspicious look, and the black-haired young man recalled everything and didn't know how to explain. The black-haired young man was quite helpless, but there was nothing he could do. In the dream, Paul couldn't realize that he was dreaming. Even if he realized it, Paul's situation would only be worse. Yes, the current Paul was no longer the same as before. After obtaining a ranking in the Challengers' Cup and improving his treatment, the black-haired young man seemed to have embarked on the path of strength. With the further increase of magic concentration in the past year, Paul's strength had also broken through to the Source Rank 3 and walked on the battlefield in last year's battle. In terms of ability, the man in the dream was probably also the owner of the Kingdom Source substance, and his ability was similar to Paul's. However, The set of armor in the dream today was far from the current Paul's level. Chapter 6:12. In fact, the girls around Roher had rich experience in watching over him at night. After all, Roher was a seasoned warrior and the number of times he was injured was too many to count. As the next successor of the Holy See, Nuo Arya Heathcliff's actions didn't only represent herself. Therefore, she couldn't do as she pleased like Shia Luote and the others. In fact, in most people's impression, Her Royal Highness was synonymous with dignified and elegant since young. In the bedroom, Miss Angel, who was holding the golden chain, was panting. After a few hours of battle, she fell into the arms of the young man with a flushed face. Hugging Nuo Arya, Luo Ye didn't complain. Instead, he got rid of the chain and sat up. He stroked the girl's hair gently. A little, but it's okay. After all, I've already experienced it once, so I can be considered experienced. Luo Ye said with a bitter smile. He recalled the night in the Tucker Plains. Although it wasn't a real body, normally, the damage received when using skills would be transferred to the body after the end. So Luo Ye thought that Miss Angel didn't have to experience pain this time. However, that wasn't the case. I see. I'm sorry to have made you suffer. Hearing Nuo Arya's words, the black-haired young man apologized decisively. Miss Angel's face turned red, and she tightened her grip on the chain. That's right. Today's Nuo Arya was different from her usual elegant and luxurious appearance. She seemed to have something on her mind. Her actions were bolder, and her attachment to Luo Ye was more serious. Nuo Arya, what's wrong with you? Is there something on your mind? Hearing Luo Ye's question, the blonde girl nodded. After a moment, she spoke out her worries. Scared? I say, Dean Antonio's plan should be just a suggestion. It won't be enforced. In the previous historical fragment, when the weak Luo Ye was about to battle with the King of Curses, priest, ancestor Estrella also asked Luo Ye to marry Lillian and leave the bloodline of the Chosen King clan. From this point, it could be seen that this kind of behavior had a long history in Shi Ya. It was also recognized by the world. If that's the case, of course, it's for the best. In fact, although Dean Antonio downplayed the matter, according to the information provided by Wilhelmina, the ridiculous plan was actually quite popular, especially in a pure academic institution like the Country of Scholars. After Luo Ye defeated the King of the Mutants, the power of the Chosen King clan, the world was aware of the world's power. Dean's words were probably a reminder and warning to the girls. If there were no results in the next few months, things would change. Chapter 6:13. In the middle of the flower-filled throne, the white-haired demoness held a flower in her hand and asked softly. Her words echoed in the spacious hall. Not far away, Luo Ye fell into silence. Although Luo Ye successfully bestowed Lillian with the characteristics of a nightmare demon through the blood of his ancestor, Estrella, and thus prevented the demoness from invading her, this incident left a deep impression on Luo Ye. And most importantly, the demoness had once told him of her wish. Of course, not just anybody would do. With the standards of the Queen of Witches, most of the geniuses in the world were probably unworthy of their reputation, so there weren't many who were worthy of her taking action. However, the offspring of Luo Ye and Lillian definitely fulfilled this requirement. Looking at the white-haired demoness in the flower-filled bed, Luo Ye's golden pupils contracted slowly. Altacia remained expressionless, but after a long silence, Luo Ye shook his head slowly. It's not good to lie, Sir Hero. Looking at Altacia, who turned around and looked at him with slight dissatisfaction, Luo Ye strolled to the flower-filled bed and stood before her. After looking at each other for a moment, the black-haired young man suddenly raised his hand and caressed the demoness' head. The sudden action made the white-haired demoness widen her eyes abruptly. Looking at her reaction, Luo Ye returned to his senses and hurriedly retracted his hand, but it was a pity that Altacia caught him midway. This, looking at the demoness who held the flower in her hand and waited for his answer, Luo Ye didn't know why, but for some reason, he felt stifled in his heart, especially the way she asked the question that was a little masochistic, which made the black-haired young man particularly uncomfortable. I don't know why, but I suddenly felt like you were about to cry, so, no, that's really what I thought. That's unbelievable. You think I'm crying? Hair. The tears of a demoness. This is probably a joke in ancient times. The black-haired young man revealed a helpless expression. He bent over and plucked a black flower from the flower-filled bed, held it in his hand, and observed it. The white-haired demoness pondered for a moment before asking again. Yes, but that's all in the past, isn't it? Although I don't know why you're paying attention to her, I don't think you'll hurt her. No. I just don't think you'll leave me. The moment she heard the black-haired young man's hesitant words, Altacia, who had her back facing Luo-Ya, widened her eyes. The witch's heartbeat quickened, and her cheeks began to blush. Before she could refute, a black rose appeared in front of her. You, really? It's because you're always like this that you've caused so much trouble. Nothing. Sir Hero, can you read minds? That's true, the world isn't peaceful now. Even if I have a body, I won't be able to recover my strength in a short time. I'm afraid I'll only end up dying again. So don't worry, I won't go anywhere. Hearing Altacia's promise, Luo-Ya smiled and nodded. On the other side, the witch, who had her back facing the young man, put the black rose on her lips, as if she was smelling the fragrance of the flower, but also as if she was trying to suppress the desire to say something. I'll accompany you until the end, no matter what the result is. It's nothing. All right, Sir Hero, it's about time to go back. What's going on? Forced expulsion? This is the handwritten version of the Second Age's Dusk Sage Society. It should be the most credible one so far. On the second day after returning from the witch's palace, in the room, the black-haired young man looked at the information in front of him and fell into deep thought. Opposite him, a grey-blue-haired girl in a dress stood uncomfortably in front of the table, constantly looking at the empty space beside her. A few days ago, Antonio proposed a plan to increase the number of members in the country of scholars. In the process of negotiation, in order to create more pressure on the other side and increase the number of allies, Wilhelmina, as the princess of the country of knights, was also pulled into the group of girls, and became one of the members who monopolized Luo-Ya's mating rights. To be honest, this mission was a little beyond Wilhelmina's limits. After all, although they had always been together in life and death, she had just understood that the relationship between Luo-Ya and a girl who liked this kind of relationship was not even at the level of being in a relationship for the time being. Suddenly having to raise the next generation together, no matter how she thought about it, was too fast. Although I've had some fantasies before, if you're in such a situation, unless you clearly say that you hate him, he definitely won't leave you alone. So, since the ending is inevitable, it doesn't matter whether it's fast or slow, right? The most important thing now is to stop that plan, or else it will become more and more troublesome in the future. In the previous Scorched Earth battle, a character suspected to be Ari Lisi appeared on the side of the Six Disasters, and because of that, Luo-Ya was abnormally emotional and was almost affected by the attack of the Light of Devouring. After everything was over, on the night that Wilhelmina took care of him, Luo-Ya asked her to investigate a problem. When she heard this request, Wilhelmina knew what Luo-Ya was thinking, so she chose to help. However, the results were not optimistic. Regarding this situation, the Twilight Sage Association had done a special research on it, and the conclusion was that the sleeping place of the Savior and Mother Goddess should be in a special space, and it was not a place that could be reached through ordinary means. When it came to space, it would naturally remind people of that disaster monster. With theoretical support and substantial evidence, from these two clues, it was almost certain what to do next. After thinking about everything, Luo-Ya turned his attention back to Wilhelmina. No, I'm also Ari Lisi's friend, so it's my duty to do this. Luo-Ya, what do you plan to do next? Roha's face was serious and firm, and hearing this, Wilhelmina nodded. Mina, please bring me along. Although my strength can't be compared to yours, if it's just to share some of the pressure, facing Wilhelmina's self-deprecating words, Luo Yue immediately refuted with a serious expression, and that was the truth. With Wilhelmina's help, Luo Yue's pressure would definitely be reduced, and hearing his evaluation, Wilhelmina's expression also brightened. Sorry, Mina, although you're strong, I want to go alone this time. Wilhelmina widened her eyes, and after a moment of silence, she couldn't help but ask. Hearing Luo Yue's words, Luo Yue stood up and walked to Wilhelmina. Hey, Ari Lizzie is indeed someone important to me, but Mina, you're also important. This time, the situation might be dangerous, and if I put you in danger just to save her, wouldn't that be putting the cart before the horse? If it's a war, let's not talk about it for now. This is my personal mission, and it's not a situation where you have to risk your life. The worried Wilhelmina clenched her fists, hoping to change Luo Yue's mind, but she didn't expect that after hearing her words, the black-haired young man shook his head. Looking at the young lady in front of him, the black-haired young man gazed at the moonlight by the window, and after a moment of silence, he said, "It might be safest if I'm alone." Chapter 614. In the middle of the night, the black-haired boy hugged the girl as he looked at the moonlight by the window and pondered. On the other side, Wilhelmina frowned after hearing Luo Yue's words. That's exactly what it means. The Akate family's ancestors had passed down many generations of history. If it was something that could affect reality, then the relationship between the Mother Goddess and Luo Yue would be very complicated. In order to not provoke the Mother Goddess, Luo Yue could only save Ari Lizzie by himself. On the other hand, Luo Yue, who understood the power of the Mother Goddess, also understood that in front of her, numbers were meaningless. If she really wanted to kill Luo Yue, then Wilhelmina would only die with him. Hey, is it because the Mother Goddess is too powerful? There was nothing wrong with taking care of him as her own child, but in reality, Luo Yue was the child of the Mother Goddess in a sense, and his current body and Shi Yue's transformation ability were all obtained with the help of the Mother Goddess. The revival of the Mother Goddess was one of the prophecies, and also one of the factors that led to the destruction of humanity. To the human race, the Mother Goddess was an inevitable enemy. Luo Yue's attitude wasn't appropriate, and he was prepared to disappoint Wilhelmina. However, to his surprise, the girl didn't say anything after hearing his thoughts. After listening to Roha's words, the grey-blue-haired girl nodded her head. Her face gradually calmed down. Roha stared at her strangely as he was puzzled in his heart. The black-haired boy's expression became strange, and the reason was simple. Luo Yue originally expected Wilhelmina to be the one who couldn't accept Luo Yue's attitude. After all, Wilhelmina was the successor of the Twilight Sage Association, and she was also the one with the most unyielding attitude. Under such circumstances, the girl with a serious personality shouldn't be able to accept this kind of wishful thinking, and even somewhat naive thinking, but why was her reaction so calm? Wilhelmina, you agree with me? Hearing Wilhelmina's words, Luo Yue frowned and naturally thought of the girl's old habit. Luo Yue naturally didn't want to see such a situation, and he had seriously discussed it with Wilhelmina several times, but it seemed that this deep-rooted thought didn't change. For some reason, Wilhelmina lowered her head, and her face was flushed, completely different from the expression when she called herself a tool in the past. After a moment of shyness, the girl spoke again. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.